The gunshot echoed across the Texas plains, shattering the tranquility of the moonlit night as Penelope Moore clutched her bleeding side and urged her exhausted mare onward. San Antonio was still miles away, and the men who had ambushed her stagecoach wouldn't stop until they found her the only witness to their brutal crime. The year was 1875, and the West was still wild, unforgiving to those who traveled alone, especially a woman with nothing but determination and a small derringer for protection. Pain seared through Penelope's body as she guided her horse deeper into a dense grove of cottonwoods. The wound wasn't deep, but it bled steadily, staining her once fine blue traveling dress. At 24, she had never imagined finding herself in such dire circumstances, having left her comfortable Philadelphia life behind to accept a teaching position in San Antonio. The promise of independence and adventure now seemed like a cruel joke as she dismounted with difficulty, tethering her horse to a low-hanging branch. "Just rest a moment," she whispered to herself, sinking against the rough bark of a tree. Her fingers trembled as she pressed her handkerchief against the wound, watching as crimson bloomed across the delicate white fabric. Exhaustion pulled at her, but fear kept her alert. The outlaws who had attacked the stagecoach, killing the driver and the other passengers, could still be tracking her. Every shadow in the gathering dusk seemed menacing, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. The cracking of a twig nearby sent a jolt of terror through her body. Penelope fumbled for her small pistol, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she aimed it toward the sound. The hoofbeats grew louder and she braced herself, finger trembling on the trigger. "Whoa there," a deep voice called out as a tall figure on horseback emerged from the trees. The man's face was partially obscured by the wide brim of his hat, but she could see he wore the practical garb of a cowboy, dusty and worn from long days in the saddle. "I mean you no harm, madam. Stay back," Penelope warned, her voice surprisingly steady despite her fear. "I'll shoot if I must." The stranger dismounted smoothly, keeping his hands visible. "You're hurt," he observed, nodding toward her bloodied side. "I heard gunfire earlier, stagecoach robbery." "How did you— Not my first season in these parts," he replied, slowly removing his hat to reveal a face weathered by sun and wind, with kind eyes that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "Name's Yates Lawson. I ride for the Circle M Ranch not far from here." Penelope kept her pistol trained on him, though her arm was growing heavy with fatigue. "How do I know you're not with them?" "The men who attacked the coach." "Fair question," he acknowledged, keeping a respectful distance. "But if I meant you harm, I wouldn't be standing here talking." "Those men, I'm guessing Harmon's gang, they don't waste time with conversation." The name sent another wave of fear through her. Even in Philadelphia, she had heard whispers of the Harmon gang, notorious outlaws who terrorized travelers across Texas. "They killed everyone," she whispered, the horror of what she had witnessed washing over her anew. "I only escaped because I was thrown from the coach when the horses bolted." Yates nodded grimly. "They don't leave witnesses, which means you're not safe here. That wound needs tending and you need shelter before those men pick up your trail." Penelope's vision swam slightly, exhaustion and blood loss taking their toll. The pistol wavered in her grasp. I can't." In a swift motion that betrayed years of experience, Yates closed the distance between them and gently took the weapon from her trembling hand. "I'll get you to safety, madam. My word on it." Something in his steady gaze convinced Penelope more than his words. Or perhaps it was simply that she had no choice. As he helped her to her feet, she winced at the pain that shot through her side. "Can you ride?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I have to," she replied with determination. With careful hands, he helped her onto her mare before mounting his own horse, a sturdy palomino that stood patiently nearby. "My cabin's about an hour's ride from here. It's not much, but it's secure and off the main trails. Harmon's men won't find us there." They rode in silence through the gathering darkness, Penelope fighting to stay conscious as they navigated the rough terrain. Yates led the way, occasionally glancing back to ensure she was still upright in the saddle. The pain in her side had dulled to a persistent throb, but fatigue weighed on her like a physical burden. "Stay with me, miss." Yates called back. "Moore," she managed. "Penelope Moore." "Stay with me, Miss Moore, not much further now." True to his word, they soon approached a small cabin nestled against a rocky hillside, nearly invisible in the darkness. A small corral stood nearby, where several horses lifted their heads at their approach. "Home sweet home," Yates said, dismounting quickly to help her down. Penelope's legs buckled as her feet touched the ground, and he caught her easily, supporting her weight. "Easy now." The cabin's interior was simple but neat, a far cry from the squalid bachelor quarters she had imagined. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while a bed, table, and few chairs constituted the furnishings. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, filling the space with an earthy fragrance. Yates settled her on a chair before lighting a lamp and building a fire with practiced efficiency. "Let me tend that wound," he said, gathering supplies from a wooden chest. "I'm no doctor, but you learn a thing or two out here." Penelope hesitated, suddenly aware of the impropriety of the situation alone with a stranger, about to expose her injury which lay just below her ribs. But propriety seemed a foolish concern when her life hung in the balance. "I need to see the wound," he said gently, understanding her reluctance. "I'll be respectful, Miss Moore." With shaking fingers, she loosened her bodice just enough to reveal the bloody gash along her side. Yates worked efficiently, cleaning the wound with whiskey that stung fiercely, then applying a poultice of herbs before bandaging it carefully. "You're fortunate," he commented as he worked. "The bullet just grazed you. Another inch and we'd be having a different conversation." "Thank you," she whispered, overwhelmed by the day's events and his kindness. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't found me." Yates merely nodded, helping her adjust her clothing before moving to prepare some food. "You should rest. Take the bed, I'll keep watch tonight." The thought of sleep terrified her suddenly. "They'll find us, won't they? Harmon's men." "Not tonight," he assured her, his voice steady. "This place is well hidden and I covered our tracks." Still, as Penelope lay on the rough bed, wrapped in a clean blanket that smelled of pine and wood smoke, sleep eluded her despite her exhaustion. Every sound, the crackle of the fire, the occasional whinny of a horse outside, the whisper of wind through the trees made her start with fear. Yates sat by the window, rifle across his lap, his profile outlined by the dying firelight. He must have sensed her wakefulness, for he turned to look at her. "You should sleep," he said softly. "I'm afraid to close my eyes," Penelope admitted, her voice barely audible. The images of the attack flashed in her mind, the sudden appearance of masked riders, the coach driver falling, the screams of the other passengers. "Every time I try, I see it all happening again." Yates studied her for a long moment, his expression gentle in the amber light. "Then I'll keep watch till morning," he promised. "Nothing will harm you while I'm here." Something in his voice, a quiet certainty, a strength that asked for nothing in return, eased the tightness in Penelope's chest. For the first time since the attack, she felt the grip of fear loosen slightly. "Who are you, Yates Lawson?" she asked, her exhaustion making her bolder than she might otherwise have been. A small smile touched his lips. "Just a cowboy, Miss Moore, no more, no less." But as sleep finally claimed her, Penelope knew he was being modest. In a land where danger lurked around every corner, a man like Yates Lawson was a rare find indeed, and perhaps her only hope of survival. Morning light filtered through the cabin's small windows when Penelope awakened, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous day rushed back, along with a dull ache in her side. She sat up carefully, finding Yates by the fireplace, preparing what smelled like coffee. "You kept your word," she observed, noting his alert posture despite having maintained his vigil all night. He glanced over, a ghost of a smile on his face. "I said I would." "Have you slept at all?" "I've gone longer without," he replied, pouring coffee into a tin cup and bringing it to her. "How's the wound?" "Painful but better." She accepted the cup gratefully, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. "What happens now?" Yates sat across from her, his own cup cradled in weathered hands. "Harmon's gang won't give up easily. They know you can identify them. San Antonio's the nearest place with a proper law presence. Texas Rangers have an office there, but it's 2 days' ride, and we'd be exposed on the trail." "I need to get there," Penelope insisted. "I'm expected at the school, and I have to report what happened." Yates studied her with something like admiration. "You're braver than most, Miss Moore, but rushing out now would be foolish. We need to let that wound heal some, and I need to scout the area to make sure Harmon's men aren't waiting for us." "How long?" "A few days, at least." He rose, placing his cup on the table. "I'll check on the horses and have a look around. Stay inside, keep the door bolted, and if you hear anything unusual," he pointed to a shotgun propped beside the bed. "That's loaded. Use it if you have to." After he left, Penelope explored the cabin, curious about the man who had saved her life. There were few personal items: a bookshelf with a surprising selection of classics and historical texts, a stack of letters tied with twine, a framed daguerreotype of a woman with a serious expression who might have been his mother. Everything was orderly, reflecting a disciplined mind. She was replacing a volume of Thoreau when Yates returned, bringing with him the scent of fresh air and pine. "No sign of anyone," he reported, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "But that doesn't mean they've given up. Harmon's persistent." "You seem to know a lot about him," Penelope observed. A shadow crossed Yates's face. "Our paths have crossed before." "You're not just a cowboy, are you?" she pressed, sensing there was more to his story. He hesitated, then sighed. "I rode with the Rangers for 5 years. Quit 2 years ago to work at Circle M." "Why did you leave?" "That's a story for another time," he replied, his tone indicating the subject was closed. "You should rest more. I'll prepare something to eat." The day passed slowly, with Penelope drifting in and out of sleep as her body fought to heal. Yates tended to her wound again, his touch gentle but impersonal, always maintaining a respectful distance that both reassured and, strangely, disappointed her. When she was awake, they talked about books, about her teaching position, about the changing face of Texas as more settlers arrived from the east. "What brought you out here, Miss Moore?" Yates asked as they shared a simple supper of beans and cornbread. "Teaching posts are plentiful back east, I'd imagine. Safer, too." Penelope considered the question, wondering how much to reveal. "After my father died last year, there was little left for me in Philadelphia. The family business faltered, leaving more debts than assets. I needed work, and the position in San Antonio offered better pay than I could find at home. And adventure, perhaps," he suggested, a knowing look in his eyes. She smiled faintly. "Perhaps." The letters from the school board painted a picture of a growing town full of opportunity. They neglected to mention outlaws and stagecoach robberies. "Texas is still finding its way," Yates acknowledged, "but there's something honest about it. The dangers are obvious, not hidden behind polite society and proper manners like back east. You speak as though you know both worlds." He shrugged. "I've seen enough to know where I belong." That night, despite Penelope's insistence that he rest, Yates again took up his position by the window. "You need healing time more than I need sleep," he stated firmly. And once more, as darkness surrounded the cabin and the sounds of the night closed in, he promised, "I'll keep watch till morning." The routine continued for 3 days, Yates scouting the area, caring for the horses, and keeping watch while Penelope regained her strength. The wound began to heal cleanly, thanks to his care and the herbal poultices he prepared. They fell into an easy companionship, sharing the small domestic tasks that filled their days. Penelope learned that Yates was well-read and thoughtful, with a dry humor that emerged when he was relaxed. He discovered her quick mind and determined spirit, qualities that earned his respect. On the 4th morning, Penelope awoke to find him studying a map spread on the table, his expression grave. "What is it?" she asked, joining him. "Spotted smoke signals yesterday." Harmon's reached out to some of his Apache contacts. They'll be combing these hills for us. Fear clutched at her heart. We need to leave, don't we? He nodded. We'll start for San Antonio tonight. Traveling by night is riskier in some ways, but it gives us better cover from searching eyes. Can you ride? Yes, she assured him, straightening her shoulders. I'm ready. Yates studied her face as if measuring her resolve. It won't be easy, 2 long nights of hard riding, hiding during the day, and if we're spotted. We'll face that if it happens, Penelope said firmly. I won't hide forever, Mr. Lawson. A rare smile touched his lips. No, I don't suppose you would, Miss Moore. They spent the day preparing, packing food and water, checking weapons, planning their route. Yates insisted she take his heavy coat for the night journey and showed her how to load and fire the shotgun properly. As dusk approached, tension filled the small cabin. Stay close to me at all times, he instructed as they prepared to leave. If something happens to me, don't stop. Ride for San Antonio, find the ranger's office and ask for Captain Weathers. He'll help you. Nothing will happen to you, Penelope stated, unwilling to consider the alternative. Yates checked his revolver one last time before holstering it. Just remember what I said. Under the cover of darkness, they rode out, leaving the cabin that had been their sanctuary. Yates led them through narrow ravines and dense woods, avoiding open ground and established trails. The night was clear but moonless, making travel difficult but providing better concealment. Penelope followed closely, her body tense with each cracking twig or distant animal call. They had been riding for perhaps 3 hours when Yates suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. He listened intently, then gestured for her to dismount. Leading the horses into a thicket, he whispered, riders approaching, "Stay absolutely still." They crouched behind a fallen log, the horses thankfully remaining quiet behind them. Soon, Penelope heard what Yates had detected: the steady rhythm of multiple horses moving at a walk, and men's voices carried on the night air. Waste of time, one voice complained. They're probably halfway to San Antonio by now. Harmon says she's still in these hills, another responded. And he wants her found before she can talk to the rangers. What about the man she's with? Kill him. Bring her back alive if possible. Harmon wants to deal with her personally. Penelope felt a shudder run through her body. Yates placed a steadying hand on her arm, his touch conveying reassurance. They remained motionless as the riders passed nearby, close enough that the glow of a cigarette was visible through the trees. Only when the sounds had faded completely did Yates release the breath he had been holding. "They're searching north," he whispered. "We need to change course." The detour added hours to their journey, taking them through rougher terrain that tested both riders and horses. By the time dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Penelope was swaying with exhaustion. Yates led them to a secluded box canyon with a small stream running through it, walls high enough to conceal their presence. "We'll rest here today," he said, helping her dismount. Her legs nearly gave way as they touched the ground, and he caught her gently. "Careful now." "I'm fine," she insisted, though the pain in her side had flared again from the long ride. Yates raised an eyebrow, clearly not believing her, but didn't argue. He unsaddled the horses, allowing them to drink and graze on the sparse vegetation, while Penelope spread their bedrolls in the shade of an overhanging rock. "Try to sleep," Yates advised, settling nearby with his rifle across his knees. "I'll keep watch." "You need rest too," she protested. "You can't keep going like this." "I've managed on less," he replied, but his eyes were red-rimmed with fatigue. "At least eat something," she urged, offering him some of the dried beef they had packed. He accepted it with a nod of thanks, and they ate in silence, listening to the gentle gurgle of the stream and the occasional call of birds overhead. Despite her exhaustion, Penelope found herself studying Yates as he scanned their surroundings, his profile strong against the growing daylight. In just a few days, this man had become her protector, her confidant, and something else she couldn't quite define. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. "You could have left me, avoided all this danger." Yates turned to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. "What kind of man would I be if I had?" Many would have. "This isn't your fight." He was quiet for a long moment. 5 years ago, I was tracking Harmon after he robbed a bank in Lerdo. He and his gang stopped at a small homestead for horses and supplies. The family, their husband, wife, 2 children they refused to help. Harmon killed them all. His voice grew tight. I arrived too late, found the bodies, saw what he had done. That's when it became my fight. Penelope felt a chill despite the growing warmth of the day. Did you ever catch him? Came close several times, but he has connections throughout the territory, people who warn him, hide him. Yates's expression hardened. I left the Rangers because they pulled me off his trail, said I was too obsessed, too reckless in my pursuit. Maybe they were right, but I never stopped looking. And now he's hunting us, Penelope said softly. Now he's hunting you, Yates corrected, which means this might be my best chance to end it. The implication of his words troubled her. I'm not bait, Mr. Lawson, his expression softened. No, you're not. And getting you safely to San Antonio is my priority, but if Harmon shows himself, you'll do what needs doing, she finished for him. Their eyes held for a long moment, an understanding passing between them that went beyond words. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them both and they slept in turns, one always keeping watch while the other rested. The day grew hot, the canyon walls providing shade but trapping the warm air. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising an evening storm. This could work in our favor, Yates observed as they prepared to continue their journey. Rain will cover our tracks and make it harder for Harmon's men to find us. They set out as dusk fell, the air heavy with approaching rain. The storm broke just as full darkness descended, drenching them within minutes. Lightning illuminated the landscape in brief, blinding flashes, followed by rolling thunder that spooked the horses. They pressed on through the downpour, Yates leading them along ridge lines and through valleys, always moving southeast toward San Antonio. Despite the rain's advantage in concealing their trail, it made travel more treacherous. The ground turned to mud, causing the horses to slip and struggle on steeper inclines. The cold seeped through Penelope's clothes despite Yates's coat, and she found herself shivering uncontrollably. After one particularly close lightning strike that sent Penelope's mare rearing in terror, Yates called a halt. "We need shelter," he shouted over the storm's fury. "There's an old line shack about half a mile east. We can wait out the worst of it there." The small wooden structure appeared almost ghostly in the next lightning flash, a dilapidated remnant of some long-abandoned ranch operation. Inside, it was little more than 4 walls and a roof, with a dirt floor and a rusted stove in one corner, but it offered blessed relief from the driving rain. Yates tended to the horses outside while Penelope attempted to wring the water from her skirts, her fingers numb with cold. When he returned, he immediately set about building a fire in the old stove, working by the light of a small lantern he had managed to keep dry in his saddlebag. "You're freezing," he observed, concern evident in his voice as the small flame caught and began to spread warmth through the shack. "Your lips are blue. Jay just need to double you warm up," she stammered, her teeth chattering. Without hesitation, Yates removed his damp outer shirt, revealing a relatively dry undershirt beneath. "Here," he said, offering it to her. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." Propriety warred briefly with necessity in Penelope's mind, but the bone-deep chill won out. "Turn around," she requested, and he complied immediately, facing the wall while she struggled out of her sodden dress and into his shirt, which hung nearly to her knees. "Decent," she announced, spreading her dress near the stove to dry. The shirt smelled of him leather, pine, and something uniquely masculine that made her heart beat a little faster despite her exhaustion. Yates turned, his expression carefully neutral as he took in her appearance. He spread his bedroll on the floor, gesturing for her to sit. "Rest. I'll check outside again, make sure we weren't followed." While he was gone, Penelope huddled near the stove, gradually feeling warmth return to her limbs. The storm continued to rage outside, wind howling through the cracks in the walls and rain hammering on the roof. She wondered if anyone else was out in this tempest. Harmon's men, perhaps, still searching for them despite the weather. Yates returned, water streaming from his hat and coat. "All clear," he reported, removing his dripping outer garments and hanging them beside her dress. His hair curled damply against his neck as he joined her by the stove, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Will the storm slow us down too much?" Penelope asked, concerned about their timeline. "If it passes by morning, we can still reach San Antonio by tomorrow night." He ran a hand through his wet hair, pushing it back from his forehead. "The rain's a blessing, really. It'll wash away any trail we've left." They sat in companionable silence for a time, listening to the storm and the occasional pop from the stove. Penelope found herself studying Yates's profile in the flickering light. The strong jaw, the slight crease between his brows that never quite disappeared, the way his eyes reflected the firelight. "Tell me about your life before the Rangers," she said suddenly, curious about the man who had risked so much for her. He glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression, but then smiled faintly. "Not much to tell. Grew up on a small ranch near Austin. Father died when I was 16, leaving me and my mother to manage. We did all right until the drought of '62 took most of our cattle. Sold the land, got my mother settled with her sister in San Antonio, and joined the Rangers at 20. And since leaving them." "You mentioned working at Circle M Ranch. Good outfit. Owner's fare pays well. I break horses mostly, help with the cattle drives." He shrugged. "Simple life, but it suits me." "You miss the Rangers, though," Penelope observed. It wasn't a question. Yates was quiet for a moment. "I miss the purpose. Knowing what I was doing mattered." He looked at her directly. "Why teaching, Miss Moore? You're educated, clearly from good family despite your recent hardships. You could have found a husband, let him worry about providing." The question might have offended her from another man, but Yates asked it with genuine curiosity, not judgment. "I've never been one for the conventional path," she admitted. "My father encouraged my education, unlike many men of his generation. And I've always found fulfillment in learning, in sharing knowledge." She smiled wryly. "As for marriage, I haven't met a man who didn't expect me to diminish myself to enhance him." "Fair enough," Yates acknowledged, "though I'd say any man worth his salt would value a woman with a mind of her own." Their eyes met across the small space between them, and something shifted in the atmosphere of the tiny shack. Penelope became acutely aware of her state of undress beneath his shirt, of the intimacy of their situation. Yates must have sensed it too, for he cleared his throat and stood abruptly. "You should sleep," he said, his voice rougher than before. "I'll keep watch." "You always keep watch," she pointed out. "When do you rest?" "I'll rest when you're safe in San Antonio," he replied, moving to sit by the door, his back against the wall and his pistol within easy reach. Penelope wanted to argue but found herself suddenly overwhelmed with exhaustion. She arranged his bedroll as comfortably as possible and lay down, the warmth from the stove and the steady drumming of rain on the roof lulling her towards sleep. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyes already closing. "For everything." She thought she heard him reply softly, "Sleep well, Penelope," but perhaps it was just the wind playing tricks with her tired mind. Morning brought clear skies and a world washed clean by the night's storm. They set out early, making good time across terrain that was muddy but passable. Yates seemed to know every hill and valley, leading them along paths that offered cover while maintaining their direction toward San Antonio. By midday, they had reached a vantage point that allowed them to see for miles across the rolling Texas landscape. In the far distance, barely visible, were the outskirts of their destination. "We'll reach it by nightfall," Yates said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Just need to be careful these last few hours. Harmon might have men watching the approaches to town." They continued with increased caution, Yates frequently stopping to survey their surroundings before proceeding. Penelope found herself both relieved that their dangerous journey was nearing its end and strangely reluctant to see it conclude. In the span of less than a week, Yates Lawson had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Late in the afternoon, as they traveled through a wooded area about 10 miles from San Antonio, Yates suddenly reined in his horse, his posture alert. "What is it?" Penelope asked, her heart rate accelerating with alarm. "Smoke," he said tersely, pointing to a thin column rising above the trees ahead. "Stay here, I'll check it out." "No," she protested, fear gripping her at the thought of separation. "We stay together." He hesitated, then nodded. "Stay close, and if I tell you to run, you run, don't look back." They approached cautiously, dismounting and leading their horses through the trees. The smoke grew thicker, and soon they could see its source, a small campfire in a clearing. 3 men sat around it, their horses grazing nearby. Yates pulled Penelope behind a large oak, his finger to his lips as they observed the scene. The men wore the dusty clothing of trail riders, with guns prominently displayed on their hips. One, a tall man with a scarred face, was speaking, his voice carrying in the still air. "Said to wait here. Harmon's sure they'll come this way if they're heading to San Antonio." Penelope felt Yates tense beside her. They were trapped. The men blocked their most direct route to town, and backtracking would cost precious time, potentially leading them into other search parties. "We need a diversion," Yates whispered, his mind clearly working through their options. "Something to draw them away so we can pass." As if in answer to his words, a distant explosion echoed across the hills, causing the men in the clearing to jump to their feet, hands on their weapons. "What the hell was that?" one demanded. "Sounded like dynamite," the scarred man replied. "Could be mining, could be trouble. Better check it out. Harmon will want to know if there's rangers in the area." They mounted quickly, riding off in the direction of the explosion. Yates and Penelope remained hidden until the sounds of their departure faded. "Lucky timing," Penelope breathed. Yates's expression was grim. "Too lucky. That was no mining explosion. Someone's drawing them out or setting a trap. For us, maybe, or maybe for Harmon's men." He considered for a moment. "Either way, it's given us an opening. We need to move fast while they're distracted." They mounted and rode swiftly, avoiding the clearing but maintaining their course towards San Antonio. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the landscape and making it harder to spot potential dangers ahead. They had just crossed a small stream when the sound of hoofbeats approached from behind. Yates cursed under his breath, scanning for cover, but they were in relatively open ground. "Ride," he commanded, spurring his horse forward. Penelope followed, her heart pounding as they galloped across the rolling terrain. The pursuit gained ground steadily. Whoever was behind them had fresher horses and was riding hard. A shot rang out, the bullet whistling past Penelope's ear. She gasped but maintained her seat, urging her tired mare to greater speed. Yates drew his revolver, twisting in his saddle to return fire, forcing their pursuers to spread out and slow momentarily. "There," he shouted, pointing to a rocky outcropping ahead. "We can make a stand there." They reached the rocks just as another volley of bullets kicked up dirt around them. Dismounting quickly, they led the horses behind the largest boulder and took up defensive positions. "How many?" Penelope asked, trying to keep her voice steady as she readied the shotgun Yates had given her. "3, maybe 4, he replied, reloading his revolver with practiced efficiency. "Same men from the camp, I'd guess. They must have realized the explosion was a diversion." The riders had stopped just beyond effective pistol range, clearly assessing the situation. One detached from the group, riding in a wide circle as if looking for another approach to their position. "They're trying to flank us," Yates observed grimly. "We need to hold out until dark. Once night falls, we might slip away." But darkness was still at least an hour away and their ammunition was limited. Yates fired carefully, making each shot count, while Penelope kept watch on their exposed side, the shotgun heavy in her hands. The standoff continued as the sun sank lower, neither side gaining advantage. Then, just as the light began to fade from the sky, a new sound reached them, more riders approaching, but from the direction of San Antonio. Could be reinforcements for them, Yates warned, his face tense with concentration. The new arrivals crested a rise, silhouetted against the darkening sky, 6 riders moving in formation. As they drew closer, Penelope could make out details of their appearance, including the distinctive badges pinned to their vests. "Texas Rangers," she breathed, hope surging through her. The effect on Harmon's men was immediate. They broke off their attack, wheeling their horses around to flee. The Rangers gave chase, though 2 peeled off to approach the rocky outcropping where Yates and Penelope had taken cover. "You folks all right?" called a deep voice as they neared. Yates stood slowly, keeping his hands visible. "We're unharmed. I'm Yates Lawson, former ranger. This is Miss Penelope Moore. She witnessed the Harmon gang rob and murder the passengers of the Northern stage 4 days ago." The lead ranger, a graying man with a weathered face, dismounted and approached them. "Captain Weathers," he introduced himself, "we've been looking for survivors from that attack." He nodded respectfully to Penelope. "Mighty glad to find you alive, madam." Relief washed over her in a dizzying wave. "How did you know to look for us?" she asked. "We've been tracking Harmon's movements," Weathers explained. "Got word he was searching these hills for a witness when we heard shooting." He glanced at Yates. "Lawson, been a while. Heard you were working ranch duty these days." "That's right," Yates confirmed, something guarded in his expression. Weathers seemed to read more in his former colleague's face than was spoken. "Well, let's get you both to town. Miss Moore will need to give her statement, and you look like you could use a hot meal and a proper bed." As they rode toward San Antonio, flanked by rangers, Penelope found herself watching Yates. He rode slightly apart, his expression distant, as if already withdrawing from her. The realization brought an unexpected ache to her heart. San Antonio welcomed them with lamplit streets and the promise of safety. Captain Weathers escorted them directly to the ranger's office, a solid building near the town center. Inside, Penelope provided a detailed account of the stagecoach attack, while Yates added information about their subsequent journey and encounters with Harmon's men. "You've both been through quite an ordeal," Weathers commented when they finished. "Miss Moore, the school board has been notified of the delay in your arrival. They've arranged accommodations for you at Mrs. Blackburn's boarding house until you're recovered enough to begin your duties." "And Harmon?" Yates asked, his voice tight with contained emotion. "We'll find him," Weathers assured him. "Your information gives us our best lead in months, but that's ranger business now, Lawson." The warning in his tone was clear. Yates's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. Penelope sensed the history between the 2 men, the unresolved tension that surrounded Yates's departure from the Rangers. An officer escorted Penelope to the boarding house, a neat 2-story building on a quiet street. Mrs. Blackburn, a kindly widow with sharp eyes that missed nothing, showed her to a comfortable room with a real bed and promised hot water for bathing would be sent up immediately. Left alone, Penelope found herself standing at the window, looking out at the town that was to be her new home. Somewhere out there was Yates, perhaps already preparing to return to his life at Circle M Ranch. The thought brought a hollow feeling to her chest. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Expecting Mrs. Blackburn with the promised bath water, she was startled to find Yates standing in the hallway, hat in hand. "Mr. Lawson," she greeted him, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance after their long journey. "Miss Moore," he replied, his expression unreadable. "I wanted to make sure you were settled before I took my leave." "You're going tonight?" She couldn't keep the disappointment from her voice. He nodded. "Best that way. I've business to attend to." "Harmon," she said, understanding immediately. "You're going after him, despite what Captain Weathers said." Yates didn't deny it. "I've been hunting him too long to stop now. It's dangerous. You'd be alone without the Rangers' support." "I work better alone," he said simply. Penelope stepped closer to him, emboldened by the knowledge that she might never see him again. You saved my life, Mr. Lawson, more than once. I don't know how to thank you for that. No thanks needed, he replied, his voice softening slightly. Anyone would have done the same. No, she contradicted him firmly. Not anyone. What you did was exceptional, and I won't pretend otherwise. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You'll do well here, Miss Moore. You have the strength for it. Because of you, she said softly, you showed me I could survive out here. Something flickered in his eyes, a warmth, a longing quickly suppressed. I should go, he said, taking a step back. Will I see you again? The question escaped before she could consider its propriety. Yates hesitated. I can't say. My path isn't one that crosses often with town life. The finality in his words struck her like a physical blow. This man, who had been her protector, her companion through terror and hardship, was walking away. In just days, he had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. Goodbye then, Mr. Lawson, she managed, extending her hand formally, though her heart protested the inadequacy of the gesture. He took her hand gently, his calloused fingers warm against hers. Goodbye, Miss Moore. I wish you well in your new life here. For a brief moment, his grip tightened, as if he too felt the insufficiency of their parting. Then he released her hand, placed his hat on his head with a nod, and turned to leave. Penelope watched him walk down the hallway, his straight back and measured stride betraying nothing of what he might be feeling. Only when he had disappeared from view did she close her door, leaning against it as unexpected tears filled her eyes. Foolish woman, she whispered to herself. What did you expect? But she knew, in her heart, exactly what she had hoped for, impossible as it might be. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity as Penelope settled into her role at San Antonio's growing school. The children, a diverse mix of backgrounds reflecting the town's position as a crossroads of cultures, were eager to learn, and she found genuine satisfaction in teaching them. The wound in her side healed completely, leaving only a small scar as a reminder of her ordeal. News came that the Rangers had captured 2 members of Harmon's gang, though the leader himself remained elusive. Penelope provided testimony at their trial, facing the men who had helped murder her fellow passengers with a composure that impressed the court. Justice was swift on the frontier. Both men were sentenced to hang. Throughout these events, she found her thoughts returning often to Yates Lawson. Had he found Harmon? Was he safe? Sometimes she would catch herself scanning the streets of San Antonio, hoping for a glimpse of his tall figure. But as autumn turned to winter, she gradually accepted that their paths were unlikely to cross again. The boarding house became comfortable, if not quite home. Mrs. Blackburn proved a good-hearted landlady who took a maternal interest in Penelope's welfare, often including her in evening gatherings with the other boarders, mostly teachers, clerks, and a young doctor who made his interest in Penelope increasingly obvious. Doctor Collins asked after you again today, Mrs. Blackburn mentioned one evening as they sat by the fire, Penelope grading papers while the older woman knitted. Such a nice young man and well-established already. Penelope smiled politely but said nothing. Doctor Collins was indeed a good man, intelligent, kind, with prospects that would appeal to most women in her position. Yet whenever he called, she found herself making comparisons to another man, one whose quiet strength and unwavering determination had left an indelible mark on her. Winter brought colder weather and the town's Christmas preparations. The school held a pageant, with Penelope's students performing admirably despite limited resources. Parents crowded the schoolhouse, applauding enthusiastically, and for the first time since arriving in San Antonio, Penelope felt truly part of the community. The night after the pageant, she returned late to the boarding house, having stayed to clean the schoolroom. Snow had begun to fall, unusual for the region, dusting the streets with white that glowed softly in the lamplight. Lost in thought, she nearly collided with a man standing at the boarding house gate. "Pardon me," she began, then stopped abruptly as recognition dawned. "Mr. Lawson." Yates stood before her, hat in hand despite the cold snowflakes catching in his dark hair. He looked thinner than she remembered, with new lines around his eyes, but his steady gaze was unchanged. "Miss Moore," he greeted her, his deep voice sending an unexpected thrill through her. "I hope I'm not intruding." "No, not at all," she assured him quickly, her heart racing. "I just didn't expect." "When did you return to San Antonio?" "Today," he replied. "I had business with Captain Weathers." "Harmon?" she asked, unable to contain her curiosity. A grim satisfaction crossed his features. "Found him crossing into Mexico 3 weeks ago. He won't trouble anyone again." The implication was clear, though Penelope knew better than to ask for details. "I'm glad," she said simply. "For the families of those he hurt. For you." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, snow continuing to fall around them. Penelope realized she was staring and gathered her composure. "Would you like to come in? It's freezing out here." He hesitated, then nodded. "For a moment, if it's proper, Mrs." Blackburn looked surprised when Penelope entered with a visitor at such a late hour, but quickly provided them with privacy in the small parlor, leaving the door conspicuously ajar as propriety demanded. Seated across from Yates, Penelope studied him in the warm lamplight. He seemed both familiar and somehow changed, as if the month since their parting had altered him in subtle ways. "You look well," he observed. "Teaching agrees with you." "It does," she confirmed. "The children are wonderful, and you, what will you do now that—" She trailed off, uncertain how to reference his personal vendetta diplomatically. "Now that my hunt is over," he finished for her. A thoughtful expression crossed his face. "I've been asking myself the same question. For so long, finding Harmon was what drove me. Without that—" He shrugged. "I'm not sure what comes next." "Will you return to the Rangers?" Weathers offered, Yates admitted. "But that chapter feels closed. The Circle MTK's owner is expanding, buying more land. He's offered me a position as foreman." "That sounds like a good opportunity," Penelope said, ignoring the disappointment that welled within her at the thought of him leaving again. "It is," he agreed. Then, with characteristic directness, he added, "But before I decided, I wanted to see you." Her breath caught. "Me? Why?" Yates leaned forward slightly, his eyes intent on hers. "Because in all these months, with everything that happened, I couldn't stop thinking about you, Penelope. About those nights when you were afraid to close your eyes, and I promised to keep watch till morning." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I've never felt as right about anything as I did protecting you, and when it was over, when I left you here, I've regretted it every day since." Penelope's heart hammered in her chest. "What are you saying, Yates?" "I'm saying I came back for you," he replied simply. "To see if perhaps you might have thought of me too, to ask if there could be something between us despite our different paths." Joy surged through her, so intense it was almost painful. "I have thought of you," she admitted softly. "Every day." Relief and hope transformed his face, softening the hard lines into a rare, genuine smile. "I have nothing to offer you but myself," he said earnestly. "I'm not a wealthy man or an educated one like your Dr. Collins." "Dr. Collins?" Penelope echoed, confused. "Mrs." "Blackburn mentioned him when I arrived," Yates explained, a hint of discomfort in his expression. "Said he's been calling on you regularly." Penelope couldn't help laughing. "Dr. Collins is a fine man, but he's not. There's never been—" She gathered her courage. "There's only been one man I couldn't forget, Yates Lawson, and he's sitting right in front of me." The tension seemed to drain from his body. With deliberate movements, he rose from his chair and knelt beside hers, taking her hands in his. "I don't know much about courting properly," he confessed. "And I know a schoolteacher should have a respectable suitor, not a former ranger with a questionable reputation. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try to be worthy of you." Penelope freed one hand to touch his face gently. "You already are," she whispered. "You always have been." Something fierce and tender blazed in his eyes. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that spoke of months of longing finally fulfilled. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he murmured reluctantly. Before Mrs. Blackburn decides I've compromised your reputation beyond repair, Penelope smiled, happiness bubbling through her like champagne. Where are you staying? The hotel on Main Street for now. He rose, still holding her hands. May I call on you tomorrow, properly this time in daylight with your landlady's approval? Yes, she replied without hesitation, and the day after that and after that. He kissed her once more, briefly but with feeling, before retrieving his hat. At the parlor door, he turned back to her. Sleep well tonight, Penelope. No need to fear the darkness anymore. I know, she said softly. Because even when you're not beside me, you're still keeping watch, aren't you? His smile was answer enough. True to his word, Yates called on Penelope the next day and regularly thereafter. Their courtship raised eyebrows in San Antonio. The refined Eastern schoolteacher and the rough-edged former ranger made an unexpected pair. But those who witnessed them together could not deny the evident affection between them. Yates took the foreman position at Circle M Ranch, which kept him busy, but allowed him to visit San Antonio frequently. He proved himself an attentive suitor, escorting Penelope to church socials and town gatherings, always respectful of her position and reputation. For her part, Penelope blossomed under his attention, her natural vivacity enhanced by happiness. Spring arrived, bringing with it new growth and possibilities. On a warm Sunday afternoon, Yates took Penelope riding outside town to a hilltop overlooking the surrounding countryside. There, with Texas spread before them in a tapestry of green and gold, he asked her to be his wife. I can't promise an easy life, he told her honestly. Ranching has its hardships, but I can promise to love you, protect you, and stand beside you through whatever comes. Penelope's answer was unhesitating. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married in early summer in San Antonio's small church. Captain Weathers stood as Yates's best man, their past differences apparently reconciled. Mrs. Blackburn wept openly during the ceremony, having appointed herself Penelope's surrogate mother for the occasion. The school children attended en masse, presenting their teacher with a handmade quilt as a wedding gift. Circle M's owner had offered them use of a small house on the ranch property close enough to town for Penelope to continue teaching until the term's end, yet part of the ranch where Yates's work centered. They moved in immediately after the wedding, beginning their life together in a home that combined her books and his practical tools, a blend of their separate lives now joined as one. On their first night there, as darkness fell across the Texas landscape, Penelope stood on the porch watching the stars appear. Yates joined her, slipping his arms around her waist and drawing her against his chest. Happy, he murmured against her hair. Completely, she affirmed, leaning into his embrace. Though it still seems almost like a dream sometimes. That night when you found me in the woods, I never imagined we'd end up here. I think part of me knew even then, he admitted. Something about you. I couldn't have left you behind if I'd tried. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as the moon rose over their new home. Eventually, Yates turned her gently in his arms to face him. Time to come inside, Mrs. Lawson, he said softly. It's getting late. Penelope smiled up at him, love evident in her expression. I'm not afraid of the dark anymore, she reminded him. Not with you here. Even so, he replied, tenderness in his eyes as he echoed words spoken long ago. I'll keep watch till morning. Every morning for the rest of our lives. And as he led her inside to the warmth and promise of their shared future, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that he would keep that promise just as he had kept every other. In a land still wild and sometimes dangerous, she had found not just safety but love, with a man whose strength was matched only by his devotion. The years that followed proved the wisdom of their union. Penelope continued teaching until their first child was born, a son they named Thomas, after her father. 2 years later came a daughter, Elizabeth, with her mother's determination and her father's steady gaze. The Circle M prospered under Yates's management, eventually allowing them to purchase their own small ranch nearby, through drought and abundance. Through the changing face of Texas as the frontier gradually yielded to civilization, they remained each other's constant. And though Penelope no longer feared the darkness, Yates never broke his habit of keeping watch the protector who had found his purpose not in hunting outlaws, but in safeguarding the family that had given his life its greatest meaning. On quiet evenings, they would sometimes sit on their porch, watching their children play in the Texas twilight, and remember how their story began with a desperate woman afraid to close her eyes, and a cowboy's simple promise that changed both their lives forever.